Hi everyone, Dr. Dave Richardson. I'm your instructor for today's webinar entitled What's New with MedDRA version 27.0 and the MSSO. As you know, this is a webinar that we give twice a year that coincides with the upcoming release of MedDRA. And the intent here is to inform you at a very high level of changes that have occurred in the MedDRA terminology since the last release, as well as to update you with other activities related to MedDRA and the MSSO. So assisting me today in the webinar is Sarah Clark, one of the training coordinators for the MSSO. We are scheduled for a 1-hour webinar today. There's quite a bit of material this time, so we will probably use most of that hour. And in fact, there will be time for questions and answers at the end. So in the platform that we are using, you have the ability to type in questions into the chat pane, and Sarah will hold on to those. And at the end of the presentation of slides, then I will be able to go through the questions and answer the ones that I am able to answer. And anything that requires a referral to our help desk, we'll take care of that as well to make sure that we get your questions answered. So again, we're focusing on the new release and the MSSO. So if you're waiting on the line to ask coding questions or whatever, you're in the wrong webinar. And I believe in full disclosure, so no one is disappointed by the outcome. But since we have so much to cover today, let's move forward. I do want to point out that this webinar will be offered again in English next week, and then beginning next month, it will be also translated into several other languages for those who would want to hear the webinar in other languages. The schedule of those webinars can be found on the training page as well, where you can register for those as you would like to. So let's move forward. So introducing today's webinar, the first thing I need to do is to just remind you that MedDRA is owned by ICH, and because it is a living and breathing terminology that requires maintenance, ICH created the ICH MedDRA Management Committee, which oversees the activities of the MSSO. This management committee is comprised of ICH parties, MHRA, Health Canada, and the World Health Organization as an observer. Second slide, I will just go over very quickly and summarize to say the first bullet says that the material that I'm presenting is copyrighted material and that ICH owns the copyright. And with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, you can feel free to use this material in public presentations as long as you acknowledge that ICH owns the copyright. However, if you alter the content of this presentation in any way, shape, or form, you should not imply or infer that ICH either supports or endorses the changes that you've made. The second bullet is legal language, so I will read it verbatim. The presentation is provided as is without warranty of any kind. In no event shall the ICH or the authors of the original presentation be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability arising from the use of the presentation. And the third bullet refers to third-party slides, and we have none for this particular webinar, so I'm going to skip over that one altogether. All right, so what are the topics that we're going to cover today? Well, we're going to talk about what's new with MedDRA version 27.0, a summary of changes, including those related to the standardized MedDRA queries, or SMQs. We're going to look at proactive maintenance requests, talk about our translation activities, look at changes in the points to consider documents, talk a little bit about our mapping initiatives, an update on information technology tools. Then we'll talk about MedDRA training and conclude with a presentation of upcoming meetings related to MedDRA. So what's new with MedDRA version 27.0? Well, here's the introductory slide to let you know that the English version of 27.0 will be available on March 1st, 2027. March 1st, 2024. It is a complex release, meaning that there is a potential for changes at all 5 levels of MedDRA. For this particular release, we considered 1,582 change requests, including requests related to SMQs. 1,206 of these change requests were approved, and 310 were not approved. There were also 66 change requests which were suspended either because we needed more clarification from the requester, or the international medical officers needed more time to deliberate over the particular change request. But as always, what we want you to appreciate is that a significant number of net changes occur between one version of MedDRA and the subsequent release. So let's compare version 26.1, which is the version you're currently using, with the version that's going to be released on March 1st. And as you see, as is typically the case with MedDRA, there have been hundreds of net changes in each of the 27 SOCs which make up the MedDRA terminology. It is also very characteristic as well to have a significant number of net changes in the investigation SOC, because that is the most populated of the 27 MedDRA SOCs. We will actually go into those specific changes in a little bit more detail in a few slides. But if we want to look at the complex changes related to this release, the first statement I would make is that there were no changes at the SOC or HLGT levels. However, at the HLT level, there was a change. We took an HLT called Application and Installation Site Reactions and split it into two HLTs. One is called Application Site Reactions, and the other is the HLT Installation Site Reactions. So the net summary is this. We in fact created one new HLT, which is called Installation Site Reactions, which has links through a multi-axial HLGT to the SOC's general disorders and administration site conditions, as well as the SOC injury, poisoning, and procedure complications. Effectively, we also have taken another HLT and renamed it. So we renamed Application and Installation Site Reactions, and it has been renamed as Application Site Reactions. And it has the same two multi-axial links at the HLGT level. The reason to have split this HLT was to improve analysis and hopefully to help you differentiate between products that are applied like creams and ointments versus products that are instilled, such as drops and sprays. For those of you who have been around a long time and are experts on MedDRA, you will also appreciate that the Application Site Reactions, the renamed HLT as it was the actual original name of this HLT in MedDRA from versions 2.1 through 3.3. All of the changes related to these HLTs are summarized in the What's New document, and you can also find information on the change request page of the MedDRA website. Now, I'm showing you this slide a second time because, as I pointed out, as is typically the case, we have a lot of activity in the investigation SOC. And one of the things we wanted to do in this webinar was to just drill down a little bit more into what the international medical officers thought were the most important changes in the terminology that you might want to pay attention to. So let's focus on investigations, and then I'll comment on a few other additions as well. So the first thing that we're looking here is at the SOC investigations, and specifically looking at the HLGTs within the investigation SOC, which had new LLTs added to them. There were a total of 135 new LLTs added in this particular SOC, and you can see the HLGTs that are represented. You can see a significant spread in terms of clinical concepts, so you know that these investigation terms that were added go across a number of therapeutic areas. And it's very important, if you work in one of these areas here where these topics are relevant to your product, that you might want to pay attention to what new investigation terms have been added. Looking at this a little bit further, we also wanted to look at the subpopulation of new investigation LLTs that are related to imaging techniques or procedures. And there were, in fact, 29 new LLTs added in version 27.0, which are related to imaging procedures and techniques. What we're seeing here is a graphical display of the particular HLTs that those LLTs were added to. And you can see that these involve everything from cardiac imaging to endocrine imaging to musculoskeletal imaging. So depending upon your therapeutic area, you may want to pay a lot of attention to new additions in terms of imaging techniques which were added to an HLT that you look in or use frequently in your day-to-day work. And then one other comment, which is we added 53 immune-related LLTs in this release of MedDRA. The interesting point here is that we are now showing you a series of HLTs to which these LLTs have been added. And the important point for you to take away from this is to understand that many of these LLTs will have a primary link to the immune system disorder SOC, but some of them actually have secondary links related to either, a secondary link because their primary place or primary link is to either investigations or surgical and medical procedures. So these are all immune-related terms, but they may not have as their primary SOC always immune system disorders. But again, because we've added 53 of these terms, if you work in the immunology space or things related to the immune system, it might be very important for you to familiarize yourself with these new LLTs as well. Now, moving forward, some other additions. This is related to medication errors and specifically to the HLT, which is entitled Medication Errors, Product Use Errors and Issues Not Elsewhere Classified. We have a PT in that HLT, which is called Circumstance or Information Capable of Leading to Medication Error. And as a result, we decided to add some additional LLTs for greater granularity at this PT level. So we have listed here 4 specific potential medication errors. And hopefully by having this degree of granularity with potential for medication error, wrong dose, wrong drug, and wrong route, this will allow you to be even more specific in terms of the LLTs available to you when you are trying to describe one of these kinds of circumstances or information capable of leading to a medication error. Moving forward again, looking at the HLT for product monitoring errors and issues, we decided under the PT drug monitoring procedure not performed to add greater granularity at the LLT level by adding these 3 specific LLTs. Labeled hepatic function monitoring not performed, labeled renal function monitoring not performed, or labeled blood monitoring test not performed. Now, the intent here was to select the most clinically important LLTs related to organ systems that you are likely to use. So this was not intended to be comprehensive in the sense of every possible monitoring test that was not performed, but the ones that occur very frequently and are most clinically important. Now, we always try to keep up with science because, again, the success of MedDRA depends upon its long-term maintenance and its evolution based upon its ability to incorporate new medical and scientific advances, as well as changes in the regulatory environment in which you work. So as a result, we added new PTs for gene therapy, omega genomic analysis, and also terms related to the chikungunya immunization and testing. Chikungunya is a virus that is transmitted by mosquito bites and in humans can cause a disease with fevers and severe joint pain. So we're trying to keep abreast of what's happening in medicine, science, and regulatory activities and make sure that we add appropriate terms to medical terminology, our medical terminology that allows you to code more efficiently. A couple more of these. We're going to talk about special populations. We added a PT called Women of Childbearing Potential to the SOC social circumstances. This is actually a classification term. For those of you who are involved in clinical trials, you very commonly will use this concept of a woman of non-childbearing potential, sometimes in the inclusion and exclusion criteria of a particular protocol. It defines a population of women who are not able to conceive for a number of reasons, including having reached menopause, having had a surgical operation that left them sterile, or maybe even a medical condition where they were never able to conceive. And for that reason, it's conceptually different from the infertility terms that one would find in the SOC reproductive system and breast disorders. Now, I just want you to think about social circumstances because we don't normally think about them in terms of medical concepts, but they often fall within the medical scope if they are going to be relevant to the evaluation of regulatory data, such as assessing the treatment outcome based upon the presence of well-known risk factors, which may be included in the social circumstances SOC. The other one I want to comment on is the PT, maternal immunization. This is a new PT that was added. Now, maternal immunization is immunization of a pregnant woman, the aim of which is to stimulate production of antibodies which cross the placenta and provide some protection to the neonate in their first few weeks or months of life. Important thing for you to understand about this PT is that it was added because it is a procedure to the SOC surgical and medical procedures, which is a single axial or uniaxial SOC. And therefore, it has no link to the HLT exposures associated with pregnancy, delivery, and lactation. That's important because you might think that every one of these concepts is going to be somehow linked to this HLT, but that's not always the case. And in fact, if you go into the points to consider document for term selection in section 3.10, there is verbiage there that will better explain these unique situations that I am addressing here with this PT, maternal immunization. So that takes us now to a discussion of our SMQs and a summary of those. There were no new SMQs added in version 27.0. So that means that as of 27.0, there still remain 110 SMQ topics. However, some of these SMQs are hierarchical, containing subordinate SMQs, and that's why the total number of SMQs amounts to 230. As always, we continue to maintain these SMQs based upon new additions or changes to MedDRA. And as a result, there were 248 PT changes, including adds or modifications in version 27.0. Now, if you find a need or think that there is a SMQ topic that we should consider for development, you can use the WebCR tool to submit such a request. It's going to ask for a number of criteria of information to justify an SMQ, because in fact, developing an SMQ can be a very laborious and and lengthy process. So use the WebCR tool to submit if appropriate. And as always, as it relates to the SMQs, you can use the version 27.0 introductory guide as the most comprehensive and encyclopedic reference on all things related to SMQs. But of course, and I say this every time we have this webinar, if you really, really, truly want to understand what's new with MedDRA, in the release files that you will get is this version report, which is an Excel spreadsheet with multiple pages that will allow you to look under any one of these topics and see the specific changes that have been made, such as what LLTs have been promoted, what PTs have been demoted, what new PTs have been added, and what terms may have undergone currency changes. That is the single best place to go to find out about all terminology changes with a new release of MedDRA. Okay, let's switch now to another topic, which is proactive maintenance. So proactive maintenance is the process by which you as users have the ability to, at a very high level, tell us about inconsistencies or possible corrections that are needed in MedDRA. Among the kind of things that have been pointed out to us in the past, for instance, were problems with the placement of abrasion terms, a need for dental restoration terms, as well as a request to add chemical burn grade terms. These were all proactivity requests submitted that were actually implemented. When you want to submit one of these proactivity requests, you should do so through the help desk. And the more detailed the justification that you provide for your proactive maintenance request, the better the chance of it being implemented. So we did have one proactivity request that was implemented in version 27.0. A user asked us to review the PT placement under HLT, oncologic complications and emergencies, to ensure that we were being consistent with these PT placements based upon our MedDRA rules for using site of prime manifestation in determining what primary SOC for a term should be. And based upon this proactive review, there were 5 PTs which had their primary SOC changed in version 27.0. You will see that these 5 PTs here, which previously had as a primary SOC the neoplasm SOC, have all had their primary SOC changed to the site of prime manifestation. So you might want to be familiar with these 5 because they have undergone a SOC change in this release. Let's talk about MedDRA translations. This slide is to just update you on the ambitious project we have going on to translate MedDRA into additional languages. And this one is to tell you that the MedDRA browser is currently available in 21 languages. At the start of this initiative, you will note that we mentioned back in January of 2023 the release of Arabic, and then in the past year, Estonian was released in September, and Finnish was released in December. There are several languages which are currently under development, and these 4 languages we plan to release at some point in 2024. Several of the languages that are being added as a result of our desire to translate or to support the Prescribing Information Initiative in the European Union. So as always, every time a new browser version in another language becomes available, we will alert you by an email blast, or there will be some announcement on the MedDRA website. So if you have a curiosity about one of these other languages, those are the 2 mechanisms by which you will become aware of another translation coming online. As always, the timeline for bringing these online is the time that it takes to get a quality translation. We will try to never release a translation that is not of high quality. Let's move on now to the points to consider document. There were changes made to the PTC document for term selection. Quite a few changes as well. Before I go through this, I'm going to say that this webinar will not allow us sufficient time to go through every single one of these changes that occurred. So I would suggest that each of you make an attempt to look at the very least, the red line version of the points to consider document for term selection, to acquaint yourself of the changes that have been made to the document. It will go into a deeper dive than what I'm able to do in the next several slides, but I do want to give you a general idea of what's happening with the PTC documents. So starting with the term selection points to consider document, the first change is the obvious one, which is on the title page, that we have updated the release number as well as the date of release. Now, going through some of the specific changes that you need to be aware of. In section 10, there are some changes related to exposures during pregnancy and breastfeeding. In addition, in section 3.15, which is medication errors, accidental exposures, and occupational exposures, we have had changes to the text itself and to the examples that are provided in the document. In section 3.16, we have our famous misuse, abuse, and addiction table, and we have added to that table a comparison of medication errors and off-label use, so it is all in one place for you to be able to reference. Okay, moving further through the term selection. In section 3.27, off-label use, there are edits to the text recommending that you make every attempt to get clarifying information when it is not clear that the use of a drug was actually off-label. If it's suggested in a verbatim, you should try to get clarification that it unequivocally was an off-label use. And you should not infer off-label use when it is not specifically stated. Instead, you should go back for clarification. In section 3.28.3, which is product quality use versus medication error, there are edits to the text related to the changes in 3.15.1 medication errors. And then finally, in section 4.1 on versioning, we had edited the text there extensively to direct you to the best practices document, which is the best resource to see what our current recommendations are for versioning. So again, there is quite a bit in the PTC document for term selection. And my suggestion, again, is to look at the redline version to acquaint yourself with those, or use these slides that I have shown you as the index of where you want to concentrate if you want to look at the full document itself and see what's new. In the data retrieval and presentation points to consider document, fairly straightforward. We changed the title page. That was the only update on that particular PTC. And then as it relates to the companion document, which you will recall is a document that was created to provide additional detail and information on particular measure-related topics, you will note the following. The PTC working group is working on a couple of initiatives. One is updates to the already existing sections in the companion document, specifically data quality, medication errors, and product quality issues. So when these updates to those existing sections are complete, you will again be notified by email, and there will be postings on the MedDRA website. The other thing as well is to also point out that currently under development is a new PTC companion document section entitled Manufacturing and Quality System Issues. So this is being reviewed, and when it is finally developed and approved by the MedDRA Management Committee, we will let you know that that additional section will be added to the companion document. Okay, let's talk about MedDRA mapping, ongoing activities with mapping of MedDRA to other terminologies. So let's talk about SNOMED CT to MedDRA mapping. As you will recall, the initial release was launched in April of 2021, and it is updated annually. So the next release is planned in April of 2024 and will be based upon MedDRA version 26.1, which was released in September of 2023, and the January 2024 release of SNOMED CT International version. Most of the revisions to date have been changes in MedDRA and SNOMED CT based upon either new content, changes in MedDRA currency, or inactivation of SNOMED CT terms. I'm going to shift gears and talk about MDRF, which stands for the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. MDRF has developed a harmonized terminology for reporting adverse events related to medical devices. And specifically, they have an index, or an annex, as they call it, Annex E, which is related to health effects, both clinical signs, symptoms, and condition terms and codes. This Appendix E has been mapped to MedDRA in a collaborative effort between MDRF and ICH. There are approximately 800 of these mapping terms that exist currently. So this Appendix E with the corresponding MedDRA terms and codes is available on the MDRF website. And the next update to this mapping will occur next month in March of 2024. Moving on now to ICD. The ICD-10 to MedDRA mapping launched on the 27th of June, 2023. It is one directional mapping of ICD-10 to MedDRA. The second release of this ICD-10 to MedDRA mapping was published on the 26th of January, 2024, based on WHO 2019 International Core version of ICD-10, as well as MedDRA version 26.1. The release package contains release notes, the map, and the coding conventions. So the MSSO will continue to maintain this mapping based upon the latest release of MedDRA, as well as input from users such as yourself. And then moving on to ICD-11. We continue in joint activities between the World Health Organization and ICH, with the MSSO supporting the development of a bidirectional ICD-11 to MedDRA mapping. The pilot mapping for one ICD chapter to MedDRA started in July of 2023, and the World Health Organization plan to maintain the mappings based upon user feedback as well as changes in the underlying terminologies. So activity related to ICD-11 will also be communicated via emails as well as additions to the MedDRA website. Let's move on to the information technology tool updates for this release of MedDRA. As you know, WebCR is a tool that we make available to you that allows you to submit change requests to the MSSO. These can include requests for changes to MedDRA terms, including the addition of new terms, changes to existing terms, SMQ changes, as well as translation changes. The entire interface, however, of WebCR was updated since our last What's New webinar, and that implementation took place in November of 2023. So let's just review a little bit about WebCR for those of you who are not as familiar with the product. It is a web-based tool, as I said, for submitting change requests, which has this URL. Now, the request must be in English, but again, it allows you to propose terms, SMQ, and translation update requests. We have improved the interface to make it more intuitive and more user-friendly. You are going to receive immediate visual and email confirmation of a request that you make. You have the ability to export requests that you submitted for review, as well as to query the history of change requests back to MedDRA version 5.1. You need both a MedDRA ID and change request password to submit these requests. We have an online change request submission tool that's used to enter all of the appropriate information, as well as a support section to make sure that you collect or present all the correct information. So this is the landing page that we have modified to make it easier to use. And this is an actual example of how we've modified the interface. This one, we're showing you an example of how you would submit a request for a new LLT. It is designed to be more intuitive and user-friendly. So again, to help with increasing the likelihood of implementation of a change request that you submit, the more information and the more justification you provide, the better the chance of it being implemented. Okay, let's move on to MedDRA training. As you know, we provide MedDRA training to all of our MedDRA users in a number of formats. This free training includes in-person classroom training, live webinar training, as well as our self-paced e-learning training. So you have the ability to register for in-person and live webinars on the MedDRA website, as you've done for this particular webinar. Here is the link to take you to that page. But our e-learning resources are also found in instructional videos, which are found on the MedDRA website, as well as on our YouTube channel, where we have recordings of previously offered webinars. So if you have a particular topic that you would like to see a recorded webinar on, or a particular presenter whose style or presentation you like more, you can go to our YouTube channel and find recordings of all of the previously presented webinars. A couple of other things to mention. We're very proud to release a MedDRA mission video. This was recorded at our medical team meeting last fall in Virginia. It is a video which explains MedDRA's mission and vision. It's approximately 3 or 4 minutes long, very, very well done. You can find it on the YouTube channel, and also there is a link to it on the MedDRA webpage as well. I also want to tell you that we will begin, or will be offering training in Brazilian Portuguese. The training in Brazilian Portuguese is planned. There's live training planned for March 25th through 26th. Information on that will be on the training page. And webinars in Brazilian Portuguese are planned as well. So for those of you who would prefer to have your training done in Brazilian Portuguese, understand that we heard that concern and we will be able to do that for you. And then let's move on to upcoming meetings. The first meeting I want to talk about is the European User Group meeting, which is going to be a face-to-face meeting with no virtual component. Date for that meeting is April 10th, 2024. It will be held from 9 to 1600 local time. The meeting will be conducted in English and will be held in Amsterdam, Netherlands. And here is the hotel and address where this particular user group will occur. The registration for this meeting is already available on the user group tab of the MedDRA website. And the registration is in-person meeting registration. And you can go to the website and find information regarding agenda and other kind of information as well. There's also a Chinese user group meeting, again, a face-to-face meeting with no virtual component. Date for that meeting is May 13th, 2024, local time 9 to 1700 local time. It will be conducted in Chinese. The agenda will be announced and posted to the user group page on the website. But here is the location in Beijing, and registration details will be posted to the user group page when they are available. And the last one I want to talk about is the US user group meeting, which is again a face-to-face meeting with no virtual component. The date will be the 13th of June, 2024 from 9 a.m. to 1600 local time, conducted in English. The agenda will be announced. There are a limit of seats of 70 seats for this particular user group meeting. So if you're interested, based upon the agenda, the location, and the date, you will need to register very early because, again, of space limitations. But it will be held at the Bridgewater Marriott in Bridgewater, New Jersey. And again, this is in-person meeting registration. Now, I have 20 minutes before the hour. And to my amazement, I thought this was going to take us most of the hour to go through the material. I rehearsed this many times, but it appears that I was speaking much more slowly during my rehearsals than in the actual presentation. So we've actually finished what I wanted to present in terms of material. But that will leave us now plenty of time for questions and answers that the audience might want to present. And I'll ask Sarah, have we received any questions from the audience?
We have not.
Okay, so let's hold on for a couple more minutes just to see if anything comes in. But in the interest of making sure that everyone is comfortable with some of the topics that I have touched on, I just want to show you the MedDRA webpage and show you that under News and Events, this is where you go to find the tab for user group meetings, where you can find all of the information related to a particular user group. So I mentioned the European user group meeting, for instance, and here's where one would go in order to be able to register for that meeting, as well as to find the agenda for that meeting as well. And then similarly, we talked about some other things related to training, and I just want you to be aware that here on the training site, this is where you can go to find, under training, those instructional videos that I mentioned, as well as a number of other MedDRA topics that you can find information on as well. And also be aware that we have other training materials as well under the training materials page, depending upon the topic that you're interested in. it's coding or data retrieval or the use of MedDRA tools, for instance. So I just wanted to spend that additional time just to redirect those of you who are not familiar with the MedDRA website, that all things related to MedDRA can be found there. And this is a site that you should go to with some degree of frequency to see what's new and has been added. This is the link as well to the MedDRA mission video, MedDRA MSSO video, which I would strongly recommend taking a look at. It will show you names and faces of the MedDRA personnel, as well as to have those people explain a little bit more about their missions and specific activities within the organization. So I'm going to ask Sarah, have any other questions or any questions come in?
Yes, we just got one. It says, the new companion document, which is pending review. I believe it was something to do with manufacturing and quality system issue. I wonder if you can give a few more details. I do not understand the scope of that as it relates to MedDRA.
So I will craft my answer by saying this. Manufacturing issues are not any expertise of mine as a clinical neurologist. However, we do have, obviously, MedDRA users who are the manufacturers of products. And many times things can happen in the manufacturing process. Things can be done incorrectly or out of specification, or testing may fail, or a number of things related to manufacturing can actually occur. So this was an attempt to include in the MedDRA terminology a way for manufacturers to be able to capture events in the manufacturing and quality of manufacturing process that occur within their plants. So for individuals such as myself, or maybe for the person, these particular terms will not be relevant to anything that you do unless you are involved in manufacturing. On the other hand, if you are working on the manufacturing side of the biopharmaceutical industry, you might find these additions to the companion document to be very helpful for you in terms of knowing how to go about reporting these kinds of events. Any other questions?
Yep. When will the updated points to consider and the PTC companion doc be released?
So the PTC documents come out with the release, they come out with the releases of MedDRA. So this will be the March 1st date for the term selection changes, as well as for the data retrieval and presentation changes. The companion document is going to be after that March 1st date because there's still some things being finalized, but we will make a point of, through emails and through the website, letting you know when the changes to the companion document are finalized so that you can be aware to look at those documents to see the new changes that have occurred.
Is there any consideration to provide virtual meetings in the future? Face-to-face meetings are just fiscally out of reach due to travel and accommodation cost.
We have attempted that at one point in the past. I don't want to make a statement that will be problematic, except to say that when attempting to doing virtual live face-to-face training, once the number of participants becomes large, and that's a relative concept, but once you have more than, let's say, a dozen people or so constantly interacting and asking questions, the logistics of conducting those kind of courses is extremely, extremely difficult. In fact, a pilot attempt was made to do that about a year or so ago. And the feedback was that it was very labor intensive and the logistics were very difficult to pull off. So in fact, we do have that as a potential, but we would reserve that for those situations where there is no possibility of conducting training other than through a virtual face-to-face, because again, it is not as efficient as one would like to think when you are talking about large numbers of persons involved. For instance, on a webinar like today with more than 100 connections, imagine being in a face-to-face course with 100 people on a platform, any of whom could have the ability to ask questions during the course of a presentation. So that was done in the past as a pilot, and we reserved that for exceptional situations to deploy something like that. Any other questions?
That is it for right now.
All right, I would like to thank each and every one of you for your time and participation in the webinar. The one thing I would like to suggest is related to the points to consider document on term selection, that you take the time to look at the red line release of that document and acquaint yourself with the changes that have occurred. And for those who are going to ask me, where do we find that? You go under how to use and support documentation. And when you do that, you get to the support documentation page. And if you open it, it will show you all of the versions of the PTC document, including, for instance, here, this is for the last release, the actual red line version. And that's where one would go to actually see the red line changes that have occurred in a version of MedDRA. And that is perhaps the easiest way, actually seeing the red line changes to acquaint yourself with the changes that have occurred in a MedDRA version. So if we've had nothing else come at the last minute, anything else, Sarah?
We just did, I don't know if you kind of just answered it. It says earlier in the presentation, you showed a slide of the changes at the PT, SOC, other changes at the high level. Could you please show where to find the actual changes in the PTs, promotions, and the SMQ changes at a more granular level, or where this could be found?
So that would be found in the version report. And let me go back to the slides. Because as I said, the version report is the single best place to go. So this version report will come as one of the release documents that you receive in a MedDRA release. Let's say you were interested in looking at promotions that have occurred. There will be a tab on this Excel spreadsheet that you would click that says promotions that will show you in a series of rows all of the promotions that have occurred. And that is where you can find at the most granular level every single change that has occurred in a MedDRA release. Any other questions?
Now that was it.
All right, thanks again, everyone, for your time and participation. Again, this webinar will be offered again next week in English. Check the webpage for scheduling of that webinar, as well as in other languages in the month of March. So this is Dr. Dave Richardson, thanking Sarah for her help today and signing off from today's webinar. Enjoy the remainder of your day.